In this video, I'm going to cover PS2 emulation on the Xbox Series X and S versions of Retroarch. PS2 is seriously going to be one of the cores I cover the most on this channel when it comes to Retroarch, just because it is getting updated constantly and just so many changes are occurring and it's awesome. That being said, the newest builds of PCSX2, which have a ton of fantastic features on PC, have a weird conflict with the Xbox version of Retroarch at the moment, and most things actually cause crashes. A lot of things still work, a lot of things cause crashes. It's kind of a interesting headache. After a bit of testing, it has been revealed that using the older 1.9.6 version of the PCSX2 core within the newer versions of Retroarch does still work, but you miss out on a few of the new features like automatic widescreen patches, the 60 FPS patches. We can, however, still take advantage of loading games from USB as long as they are under 3.5 gigs, kind of like on the Wii. Unfortunately, this doesn't quite work as intended and can cause issues, so I don't recommend doing so, and I will touch on that further in the vid. But considering a lot of you just want to be able to play games, we're going to make a temporary video here that shows you how to reinstate the old 1.9.6 build of PCSX2 and get that set up in the meantime until an update comes out that fixes the newer build. At that time, this video will once again be replaced to showcase the current method, as always. But for now, this will be our temporary band-aid that we can use in the meantime. So let's go ahead and dive in. The first thing we need to do to get PCSX2 up and running on our Xbox Series X and S is to install Retroarch. If you haven't done so already, refer back to my How to Install Retroarch video, because this is a continuation of that video. We are going to be using a bunch of things that we prepped in that video. One, installing Retroarch and expanding dev mode storage. And secondly, the advanced setup section I have here at the end about how to access your Xbox's internal SSD. We're going to need this to change the core out and store our PS2 games. And it's just a heck of a lot more convenient for BIOS file placement. So honestly, I'm actually not going to be covering a My Files Explorer section in this video. I am done using that program. I'm just not going to be doing it that way anymore. But yes, link to this will be in the description below. Next, we're going to need to download a few files here. The first one being the PCSX2_libretro.dll. This is the Retroarch 1.9.6 build of the PCSX2 core. So we're just going to download this. And as always, links will be in the description below. And the next thing we're going to need is my pre-made PCSX2 folder. So again, link in the description below, and just go ahead and download this. Once you have both of these downloaded, just get them extracted. They are in zip format, so nearly any extraction program should work. So just go ahead and do so. And inside you'll find a libretro DLL folder for the core, and inside the PCSX2 folder, you'll find a bunch of other folders like BIOS and all that. So, almost ready to go. Now, before we transfer these files over, there is one more thing we need to add to our PCSX2 folder before you are able to run PS2 games, and that is a PS2 BIOS. So over on my channel, I have a couple of methods to dump PS2 BIOS files. One is using an already modded PS2 FAT or a modded Slim to just dump your BIOS file. It's covered in this vid. Or if you have an unmodified Slim and are wanting to get a BIOS file, I have an entire process on how to use free DVD boot to do the same thing, essentially. So, two methods for you to choose, and get that BIOS file from your actual PS2 console. Alternatively, you can of course resort to the shady parts of the net, but don't ask me for download links because that's illegal and I don't do that crap on my channel, regardless of how many people call me names to do so. Neener neener. But once you have sourced PS2 BIOS files, we just need to add them to this BIOS folder within this PCSX2 folder that you just downloaded. So open the BIOS folder, find your BIOS files, and I actually have two separate BIOS files here. One is for my FAT, and one is for my Slim. You don't need to have both. You only need one. I just have both in the same folder because that's how I store them. So just choose one and put it on in. And once you have that placed, we're ready to begin transferring things over to the internal SSD of our Xbox. So if you follow the advanced setup section of my Retroarch guide like I just asked you to, you might have a nice network mapped drive for the internal SSD of your Xbox that you could just double click into and gain access to, and then you can find your Retroarch folder. And we're going to copy over the PCSX2 folder first. That goes into System, and you just drag and drop it. Done. And now we need to replace our PCSX2 core with the 1.9.6 version so it will work until the update comes that fixes the current version. So just drag it in and tell it to replace the file in the destination. Done. Now the last thing we need to play PS2 games on our Xbox Series X and S is, of course, PS2 Games. Going back to that playlist I was just in, I do have one method for how to back up your PS2 games for use in your emulation projects, or again, you can resort to the shady parts of the net, but same old, I'm not going to provide illegal download links, so just don't bother asking. But just a quick note on PS2 games, you can leave them in ISO or BinQ format, or you can convert them to CHUD, CISO, or gzip, and they should run as well. And that way you could save some space on the internal SSD of your Xbox. For my intents and purposes, in this demonstration though, I'm just going to leave them as plain ISO files. But getting these guys moved over to your Xbox SSD is as simple as just going back into your Xbox SSD folder, opening up the games folder you created in initial setup, and dragging in your PS2 games folder, and waiting for the transfer to finish. This is what I'm saying. Making this network drive is just so dang convenient that everyone should be doing so. And once that transfer has finished, we're ready to close out of everything on the PC side of things and jump over to our Xbox. So over on the Xbox, just go ahead and scroll down to Retroarch and tell it to launch. And from here, we're ready to begin loading up PS2 content. So one method of doing so, go down to Load Content, navigate down to your S drive, Program Files, Windows Apps, find your Retroarch folder, it's the version number followed by x64. Find the games folder that you created and put your PS2 games in, and then you can select the game, choose the core, and tell it to run. I'm personally not a big fan of this method. I like to make playlists instead, just so I don't have to navigate so many submenus. So to do this, go back out to the main menu, go to Import Content, and we're going to do a manual scan. Content directory, navigate to where you have your PS2 game stored in the S drive. And tell it to scan this directory. System name, press up on your D-pad to get to Sony quicker and find Sony PlayStation 2. Default core, same thing, press up on your D-pad to find PCSX2. Next, make sure scan recursively is turned on if you have your games separated into subfolders. And then we can begin starting the scan. And once it's completed, we'll have a new PlayStation 2 entry here on the bottom left of our main menu tab thingy. And then we can just go ahead and select a game and tell it to run. And as long as you don't have an improper system folder placement or BIOS files, it will load up into your PS2 emulation. Now, it might ask you to do some initial setup here, so just go ahead and do so. And once that setup's complete, you'll boot up into your game. And I chose Burnout 3 specifically here because this game does not boot for me under the newer versions of PCSX2 on the Xbox, yet using the 1.9.6 core here, you can see that it is booting up just fine. This happened with about 5 of my other games that I did during testing, so I'm hoping this method works for everybody, and that's why we're making a temporary video about using this method. Now, when you get started playing games, you will need to format your PS2 memory card. It'll say it's not formatted in the games you're playing, so just tell it to format it. And you will be able to start playing your games and saving them like on a real PS2. Now, performance in PS2 titles is going to vary greatly based on the game you are trying to play. More demanding games are going to be a little bit harder on the Xbox currently, especially with this older build of the core. But for the most part, a lot of things are going to be working, and you should be able to have a pretty enjoyable experience out of most things. Especially since setup's a lot easier than it's ever been up to this point. Like, until we get a fix on the current core, like, this is not a bad way to enjoy PS2 games on your Xbox consoles. But as far as basic PS2 setup goes, that's it. This will get you up and running and playing your PS2 games with default settings. So from here on out, let's go ahead and cover some of the more advanced settings that are available to us with this version of the PCSX2 core. So going into our Retroarch quick menu, we are going to navigate down to Options. And our first option is to choose our BIOS file. If I'd put both those BIOS files that I had on hand, I would have been able to choose between them here. Next up, Fast Boot. If you don't want to see that PS2 BIOS boot screen every time you load up a game, enable this option. I like it personally, so I leave it off. Renderer, ignore this, leave it on auto. Next up, we have internal resolution, and this is set to native PS2 internal resolution by default. On Xbox Series X and S, I believe a lot of things can run under a resolution of 4K, internal resolution. As of this moment, Retroarch still is not outputting at a true native 4K on Xbox Series X or S. So while you may be able to up the internal resolution of your games, you're not actually outputting them higher than, I believe, 1080p at the moment. But go ahead and change up the internal resolution. If your games begin to lag because you're up-resing them, just go ahead and turn it back down. But I mean, the results are freaking nice. Next up, we have Force Widescreen, and this will pretty much stretch your screen into a widescreen aspect ratio. This isn't the true widescreen patch. You need to have patches and stuff in place to get that to work, and I'm not going to cover that for this core. We're going to wait until the updated version comes out to really cover that in detail, because it makes it all automatic and it's so awesome. But for now, I don't really think the Force Widescreen thing is super useful in my mind. I mean, your use cases might vary wildly from mine, and you might have an absolute blast with it. Next up, anisotropic filtering. Can crank this up to 16x, or leave it off, or anywhere between. I haven't noticed too many performance hits by turning it on, so you can try it out. If it messes things up, just turn it back off. Next up, we have speed hacks. So PCSX2 has built-in speed hacks that basically reduce the emulation accuracy to get better performance out of different titles. On Xbox in particular, since the CPU speed is at a set thing, some games need higher CPU speed than what is available, so you can enable a speed hack, and then choose the speed hack preset. The safe default value is great for most things, but you can also turn it up. I don't really recommend going beyond aggressive. It will start to break things after that point, but it's really game dependent. You can look at the PCSX2 wiki and see what other users have tested. It's going to be for computer use, of course, but you can see if the game's going to have broken graphics or not, and you can try these out and see what you think. Next is frame skip. We're going to skip that. I hate frame skip, personally. I'm not even going to bother covering it. Software renderer threads. We don't need to worry about this on the Xbox. And then next are a ton of hack options that will help fix certain graphical irregularities in certain PS2 titles. These options are all going to be very game dependent, so again, refer to the PCSX wiki and compatibility guide on the official PCSX2 website to see if your game needs any of these options enabled. Otherwise, that's as far as we're going to cover them here. But that's going to cover it as far as core options are concerned, but I do want to cover one more thing here real quick, and that is multiplayer gameplay. So, plugging in a second Xbox controller should give you navigation of being able to play games with multiple people, but as you can see, performance has suffered greatly because of my high internal resolution. So if I were to crank this back down to around native, or you could crank it a little bit higher, but I just like leaving things at native personally because I like that old look. But as you can see, performance has come back ever so slightly. It's not... Actually, it might be pretty good for Burnout 3 here. But as you can see, I am playing the game with two separate, distinct players using two different controllers. And I do not have the coordination to do this, so there you go. But it is possible to play games with two players. Unfortunately, there is no multi-tap support. One last thing I want to make note of, if you happen to be using the PPSSPP core, whenever you close down that core and it crashes Retroarch, it will revert Retroarch's video driver to OpenGL, which will render PS2 unplayable. So after you're done playing a PSP game, make sure you go into your settings, go into drivers, and make sure the video driver is set to DirectX 3D11. Otherwise, again, you won't be able to play PS2, GameCube, Wii, or PSP games anymore. So, just a quick troubleshooting tip to be aware of if you are a person that wants to play PSP games. Now let's take a few minutes to talk about USB loading under PCSX2. Like I said before, you technically can now load PS2 games from USB as long as they are under the 3.5 gig limit, as I will now demonstrate. Go to my USB drive, select a PS2 game, and I have Burnout 3 and Freedom Fighters in here, both under that limit. And I'm going to tell it to load up under PCSX2. Now, load times from USB are a lot longer than they are from the internal SSD due to the fact that it has to copy the games into the Q drive before running. So, speed of the load will depend on the speed of your USB media. But eventually it will boot and allow you to play the game. And while this does seem like it works well, there is one problem with it as it stands right now, at least with this older version of Retroarch, since we can't take advantage of the new version just yet. But if you were to close out of this content, it causes Retroarch to crash, as this older version does. But the problem comes from it leaving behind a copy of that ISO in your Q drives. So this is the one and only use I still get out of my Files Explorer. You go into it, navigate to the isolated storage, go up to Packages, find your Retroarch folder, it's typically the top one, go down to Local State, and if you scroll down, you will see that there is still a copy of Freedom Fighters in the Q drive. And this is a huge problem because once the Q drive gets filled up to about 16 to 20 gigs, it will break your entire Retroarch install and you can't run anything. Not to mention, if you try to play this game again, it won't load from USB. I've never been able to run the same game from USB twice in a row without coming in here, manually deleting it, and letting it recopy over. So unfortunately, USB, with this temporary solution to get most PS2 games up and running, USB loading is a casualty. So I have to come in here and I have to delete this file so it doesn't screw up my Retroarch install. So again, still highly recommend loading everything from the internal SSD as of now. Again, when things get updated and changed, so will the video. But that's where we stand as of right now. But that's going to cover it as far as PS2 emulation is concerned on the Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch as we stand of today. Again, this is a temporary video until the latest version of the core is once again up and running on the Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch, because it does have a ton of extra features, but thanks to the crashing issues due to the latest update of the Xbox, it just doesn't work right. So we gotta fall back on this for the time being. Again, once that update is around, this video will be replaced to cover all the latest and greatest. But as always, if you happen to have any questions on the setup process of getting PS2 games up and running using this method, feel free to ask me down in the comment section below, and I will do my best to try to help you out. And just a quick thank you to each and every one of you for watching these videos. I'm glad they can help you out and get your emulations projects set up. And it's just fun to see what some of you have been doing with it. But now if you could all do me a couple of huge favors here. If you haven't done so already, please hit that thumbs up or thumbs down button, just depending on how much you like today's tutorial. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to hit that sub button so you can see when new tutorials go live on the channel. We're updating our Retroarch vids constantly, so things change as time goes on, and I want to make sure to keep these up to date for you since y'all have done such an amazing thing for us by making this grow so big thanks to these videos. Now, if you'd like to further help support the channel and keep things going, you could also check out that join button here on YouTube or the Patreon link in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Little really goes a long way to keeping us going and bringing all the update vids to you as they come. And just a big shout out to all of our current backers and champions. Y'all are just such amazing rock stars. Thank you for believing in what we do here and supporting us as you have. Y'all are amazing. But that's going to do it for this one. So until next time, my wonderful internet peeps, you all stay awesome, and we will see you back next video.